Welcome to the Silverwood Saga podcast. Follow the story at silverwoodsaga.com. Now, it's time to step back into the forest. The early morning fog clings to the cobblestones. An adult man with fair skin, short dark brown hair, and light stubble. His eyes are green and tired, having just woken up from sleeping on the street. He pulls his rustic brown, hooded tunic tight around him to keep the morning chill off. He carries his broom towards the dock. The air is cool, carrying the faint, salty scent of the sea. The town is still quiet at this hour, the echoes of his footsteps mixing with the distant creak of wooden ships shifting against their moorings. By the dock he begins his work and sweeps back and forth in a steady rhythm. The bristles scratch against the stone, pushing away a mix of dried seaweed and broken bits of crates, left behind from the market's bustling night before. Seagulls call out overhead, swooping low in hopes of finding a morsel among the debris. He moves along the street, lined with rough-hewn stone buildings. Puddles glimmer in the dawn light. The shuttered fishmonger's stall, yesterday's catch lingering in the air. His calloused hands grip the broom handle, taking quiet satisfaction in clearing the mess and leaving the cobbles clean behind him. Across the street, a tavern's door swings open with a thud. A bleary-eyed sailor stumbles out, clutching his coat tightly against the morning chill. He throws the street sweeper a nod, more out of habit than real greeting, before staggering off toward the docks. The low murmur of voices inside the tavern spill out onto the street, where a few hardy souls are finishing the last of their drinks before the sun fully rises. Further down the street a cart creaks as an old woman, wrapped in layers of patched wool, pushes her way through the fog. She sells bread to the dock workers who'll soon be starting their shifts. She gives the street sweeper a small smile as she passes, a familiar nod exchanged between two who start their days before most of the town wakes. As he sweeps, he watches people go about their lives, finding a strange satisfaction in their routines and little dramas. He sees the same faces each day. There's the grocer, a balding man with a booming laugh, who never notices how his apprentice sneaks a piece of fruit now and then. The seamstress, who opens her window every morning to shake out her fabrics. A young woman from the bakery who sweeps her own stoop across the street, sometimes catching Jay's eye with a shy smile before turning back to her work. He is invisible to them, blending into the background of Greyport's daily bustle, just another part of the town's constant hum. Sometimes he wonders if they realize he's there at all, sweeping away the traces of their lives. He sees little arguments between a merchant and a fisherman over a disputed price. The quiet exchange between a young couple stealing a moment together by the water's edge. He catches laughter, anger, and sorrow, all of it flowing around him like the tides, while he remains steady and constant. Yet there's a peace in this kind of invisibility. In these moments he finds a quiet kind of joy. He doesn't need to be noticed to feel like he belongs in this town. He belongs in the rustle of the wind through the alleyways, the clatter of hooves on cobblestones, and the rhythmic flow of his own work. Life is simple, almost painfully so. He has no house to call his own. Most nights he sleeps wherever he can find a sheltered spot away from the wind and the watchful eyes of the town guards. His preferred places are under the eaves of abandoned warehouses or tucked behind the crates stacked along the docks. He makes just enough coin from his sweeping to keep himself going. Barely enough to fill his belly most days, but it's reliable. On good days, when he manages to earn a few extra coins, He treats himself to a drink at the Rusty Anchor, a dingy tavern near the docks where the floor is always sticky and the beer is always strong. There he can sit among the noise and laughter, the voices of sailors recounting tall tales, and the clink of dice on a wooden table, even if he's not really a part of it. He nurses his drink slowly, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. But even these small comforts are fleeting, and once his coins are spent, he returns to the streets. When the tavern grows too noisy or the night becomes too cold, he slips away into the alleys, seeking out his chosen spot for the night. He wraps himself in his tunic, pulling it tight against the night air, and lies down hidden behind a stack of barrels. He listens to the sounds of the town, dogs barking in the distance, the low murmur of the sea, and the occasional drunken song drifting out from a tavern. It's not much, but it's enough to lull him to sleep, even when the stones beneath him press uncomfortably against his back. And that's his day, his cycle for the last countless years. He completes another shift as dusk settles over Greyport, casting long shadows that stretch across the cobbled streets. His arms ache, a dull throb from the steady rhythm of the broom, but he's used to the feeling. He slings the worn wooden handle over his shoulder and tugs the frayed collar of his coat tighter against the cool evening breeze. He turns down the road that leads to the Rusty Anchor, its battered sign barely visible in the gathering dark. A faint light spills from the windows of the tavern, warm and golden, flickering as figures pass by inside. He pauses at the door, brushing some stray dirt from his coat and resting his broom against the wall. He knows it won't make much difference to his appearance. The Rusty Anchor isn't a place for appearances. Its patrons are more interested in a strong drink and a hot meal than in who walks through the door. He steps inside, the heavy wooden door creaking as it swings shut behind him. A rush of warmth greets him, carrying the mingled scents of stale beer, roasted meat, and the acrid smoke of the hearth. The interior is dim, lit mostly by flickering lanterns and the crackling fire that burns in a large stone hearth at the back of the room. The wooden beams overhead are darkened with age and smoke, and the floorboards groan underfoot, scarred from years of booted feet and the occasional bar fight. Around him, the noise of the Rusty Anchor fills the air with a chaotic symphony of laughter and the murmur of conversations. At a corner table, a group of sailors lean close together, recounting tales of distant lands and storms that nearly claimed their ship. Nearby, a pair of dock workers argue over a game of dice, coins clattering on the table as their tempers flare. The bar is lined with regulars, each hunched over their drinks, faces half hidden in the shadows. He makes his way through the crowd and heads for the far end of the bar, where a few empty stools wait, their wood worn smooth by years of use. He takes a seat, letting out a small sigh as he finally settles his weight off his tired legs. The barkeep, a burly man named Harlan, with a grizzled beard and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, glances up from polishing a dented tankard. He gives him a nod, the kind of acknowledgement that says he's been noticed, but nothing more. Just a recognition of one regular to another. "What'll it be tonight, Jay?" Harlan's voice rough from years of shouting. Jay glances at the chalkboard propped behind the bar, where the day's offerings are scrawled in a shaky hand. It's the same as always, stew, bread and cheap ale. The smells coming from the kitchen aren't promising, but they're familiar. Jay hands over some coin, whatever this will get me. As Harlan turns to fill his order, Jay leans on the counter, resting his elbows on the smooth, sticky surface, letting the warmth from the hearth soak into his bones. He can feel the ache in his muscles fade, his hunger gnawing at him but tempered by the promise of a hot meal. Harlan places a bowl of stew and a tankard of ale on the bar. Jay picks up his drink and bowl of stew from the bar, then turns from the bar calling out, "A magnificent meal as always, Harlan." Then there is a thud as his bowl hits something, a figure behind him. It sends his stew sloshing, and then there is a splash of liquid hitting the floor, and the soft thud of a tankard follows. He stops, blinking down at the mess, realizing with a sinking feeling that he's knocked someone's drink right out of their hand. His eyes shift to the side and meet the gaze of an elf standing in front of him. The elf is just shorter than him, around 5'4" tall, but everything about her radiates a quiet grace. She stands with perfect poise despite the accident, her slender form tense but balanced, as though ready to react to whatever might come next. Her long golden hair, loose tonight, catches the firelight from the hearth, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Her brown eyes lock onto his, and there's no hiding the disappointment and annoyance in her expression as she starts wiping stew from her top. Her gaze shifts from the stew on her top to the floor, where the contents of her drink have splattered across the wooden boards. She exhales slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. The soft leather of her tunic shifts with her movements as she steps back from the spilled liquid, her boots barely making a sound on the floorboards. Despite her practical adventuring gear, there's a clear elegance to her. Jay's eyes dart to a dagger at her side, a slender blade resting in a finely crafted sheath, a subtle but clear reminder that this is no ordinary tavern-goer. The elf takes a slow breath, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face before looking back at Jay. He stands frozen for a moment, his mind scrambling to process the scene before him. The elf's beauty strikes him like a gust of wind, her golden hair catching the firelight, her poised and athletic form exuding an otherworldly grace. For a moment he forgets the spilled drink between them and the irritation in her gaze. Realizing he's been staring too long, he struggles to find the right words, his cheeks flushing slightly as he fumbles with his thoughts. Let me," he stammers, gesturing clumsily to the spill on the floor. "Let me buy you another drink. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry about that." The words tumble out. He shifts his grip on his own drink and plate, suddenly very aware of how out of place he feels standing in front of her. The elf arches a delicate eyebrow, her expression shifting subtly as she studies him. For a moment she seems to be weighing his offer, her gaze flicking between his face where a hint of awkwardness lingers, and the splattered remains of her own drink on the floorboards. There's a glint of amusement lurking in her eyes now, as though she finds his clumsy attempt at making amends somewhat endearing. She tilts her head slightly, her golden hair brushing over one shoulder, and allows herself a small, exasperated sigh. "Very well," she says. There's a touch of teasing in her tone as her posture relaxes. "I'll accept your offer, but next time perhaps watch where you're going." Jay blurts out, "2 drinks, Harlan, please." His voice is louder than intended. He stands there, his face flushed with a mix of nerves and embarrassment. Harlan, wiping a glass with a rag behind the bar, looks up at Jay with a bemused expression. He raises a grizzled eyebrow, glancing pointedly at the drink in Jay's hand. "You sure about that, Jay?" he grunts, his voice carrying a hint of rough amusement. "Looks like you're already well stocked." Jay's face grows warmer as he realizes his mistake, glancing down at the tankard he's clutching. The elf, too, follows his gaze, her lips curving into a small, teasing smile. A soft, melodic chuckle escapes her, lightening the tension between them. "Well," she says, folding her arms across her chest, "you certainly seem eager to make amends. I won't say no to a second drink, though I wonder how you'll carry it all." Harlan smirks at Jay's predicament, but dutifully pours another drink, sliding the fresh tankard onto the bar with a low thud. "Here you go, lad," he says, his voice gruff but good-natured. "Now, if you figure out how to carry it all without dropping anything, I might just consider it a miracle." Jay finds himself standing there, juggling his dinner, his drink, and the fresh tankard meant for the elf. his thoughts racing as he tries to decide how best to untangle himself from this mess. The elf, watching his struggle with a small bemused smile, seems content to let him fumble. Jay stumbles awkwardly across the crowded tavern floor. He manages to juggle the 2 tankards of ale and his plate of stew, though it's a near miracle that nothing spills. The elf follows him with a light, almost feline grace, weaving between the tables with ease, her bemused smile never quite leaving her lips as she watches his efforts. He reaches an empty table near the back of the tavern, placing the drinks down with a clumsy thud, nearly toppling one in the process. He sets his plate of stew down next. Jay lets out a breath of relief, his cheeks still flushed from the effort, and pulls out a chair, gesturing for the elf to join him. "Please, have a seat," he says, his voice stumbling over the words, trying to muster up some semblance of composure. He gestures toward the plate of stew, the steam still rising from it. "Would you like some food?" He pushes the plate slightly toward her in what he hopes is a generous and smooth gesture, but it ends up being a bit more awkward than he intended. He catches himself, realizing too late that offering up his own meagre meal might look desperate. The elf's expression shifts, a flicker of surprise crossing her face as she glances at the offered food, then back at him. She hesitates for a moment, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "You'd share your dinner with a stranger?" she asks, her voice lilting with that musical elven accent. There's a note of genuine surprise beneath the teasing tone. She takes the offered seat, her movements smooth and controlled. She leans back slightly, letting her cloak fall open to reveal more of the intricate embroidery that catches in the dim lantern light, giving her a faint, ethereal glow in the shadowy corner of the tavern. Her gaze flits back to Jay. "I'll take you up on the drink, at least," she says, wrapping slender fingers around the tankard he bought for her. She lifts it with a graceful ease, taking a sip and savouring the taste before setting it back down on the table. "But you should keep your dinner," she continues, her tone gentler. "You look like you need it more than I do." Jay takes a deep breath, steeling himself, and thinks, fake confidence for 5 minutes. "And you shall have it." The words run through his mind like a mantra, something to cling to as he faces the elf across the small, worn tavern table. He glances briefly at the plate of steaming stew, but any thought of eating vanishes under the pressure of the moment. Instead, he forces a smile, a bit too wide, but genuine. He straightens up slightly, doing his best to appear more at ease than he feels. "My name's Jay," he says, extending a hand across the table in what he hopes is a friendly gesture, though it hovers a bit uncertainly halfway. "Jay," she repeats, as if tasting the sound of it. Her smile grows just a fraction, her lips curving slightly, though there's still a hint of that earlier amusement in her expression. "Not a name I've heard before. Fitting, I suppose, for someone who manages to stumble into a stranger and then offers them his dinner." Her fingers still loosely curled around the handle of her tankard. Her name slips out casually. "Silra," she replies. She doesn't reach for his hand, but her gaze flickers down to it, then back up to his face. She leans forward slightly, resting her elbow on the table and cradling her chin in her palm. Her other hand still holds the tankard, which she swirls idly, the liquid inside sloshing quietly. There's a glimmer in her brown eyes as she studies him. "So, Jay, is this how you usually spend your nights?" she asks, her tone teasing but not unkind. "Knocking drinks out of people's hands and offering up what little you have?" Her eyes catching the flicker of the lantern light, her expression seems both playful and faintly mysterious. Silra takes another small sip of the ale, her expression remaining neutral as the taste settles on her tongue. Her brow furrows slightly, just enough for Jay to notice. She places the tankard back on the table, wrapping her fingers around the rough handle, but making no move to take another drink. Jay catches the subtle downturn of her lips, and before he can think better of it, he tries to fill the silence with another bit of small talk. "Yeah, I do come here a fair bit," he says, his tone trying for casual but landing somewhere closer to nervous. He shifts in his seat, scratching the back of his neck. I haven't seen you here before. Guess you don't make it down to these parts too often?" Silra raises an eyebrow, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she responds. "No, I don't." She says simply, her voice smooth and unhurried. Her eyes flick back to the tankard as if considering whether to give the drink another chance before deciding against it. "I don't often have a reason to visit places like this." She sits back in her chair, crossing her arms loosely over her chest, her cloak settling around her shoulders like a shadow. There's a slight tension in her posture, a wariness that suggests she's still sizing him up, trying to decide if he's worth her time. "You seem comfortable here," she adds, her tone laced with a touch of dry humour as she glances around the smoke-filled room, her gaze briefly passing over the rowdy patrons. "I suppose you must find something here that suits you." "Well, I bumped into you." Jay's words hang in the air for a moment, the bluntness of his tone slipping out before he can catch himself, realizing how it might have come across. His cheeks warm slightly and he rushes to recover, glancing down at her untouched drink and adding with a small sheepish smile, "You don't like the ale, do you?" Silra raises one eyebrow, arching in a way that makes her look both amused and slightly exasperated. Her fingers tap lightly against the edge of the tankard, a small rhythmic motion as she considers her reply. "It's not quite what I'm used to," she admits, her voice still carrying that lilt of dry humour. Her lips curl into a small wry smile. "Elven drinks tend to be a bit more refined. Less like, well, seawater mixed with barley." She glances around the room, taking in the rough edges of the rusty anchor. She looks back at Jay, her expression softening a fraction as if she's decided to humour him a bit longer. "But it's not the worst thing I've tasted," she adds, a hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I've had worse while travelling, though I'm sure your offer was meant kindly." Her eyes linger on his, and for a moment. "Why do you ask, Jay?" she says, tilting her head slightly. "Are you planning to recommend something better?" She leans back, crossing her arms again, the motion causing her cloak to shift slightly, revealing more of the intricate embroidery, delicate swirls and patterns that seem to shift subtly in the dim light, adding a touch of the otherworldly to her presence. Jay raises a hand to Harlan, his voice a bit steadier now that he's taken a few swigs of his own ale. "Two of the strong stuff, Harlan," he calls out, the words coming easier this time. Harlan glances over, gives a small nod, and soon enough 2 small glasses of a clear, fiery spirit are placed on the table between them. The liquid catches the light, swirling with an amber hue. Jay slides one of the glasses over to Silra with a grin that's starting to look a little more genuine. He leans back in his chair, trying to mirror the ease she carries so naturally. He lifts his own glass in a small, awkward toast, and she regards him for a moment before lifting hers as well, her fingers graceful around the rim. Glasses clink softly, their chime lost in the low murmur of the tavern. Jay takes a long sip, the spirit burning a pleasant trail down his throat, spreading warmth through his chest. Silra lifts hers more thoughtfully, tasting it with quiet appreciation. A small smile plays at her lips as the sharp, clean bite proves far more agreeable than the flat ale they'd choked down earlier. Her eyes glint with renewed interest as she sets the glass down, watching him over the rim with a gaze that seems to cut through his bravado. "So, Jay," she says, her voice carrying a sharper edge now, though the playful tone still lingers beneath. "What are you expecting to gain out of this little dance?" Jay stands up abruptly, his chair scraping against the worn wooden floorboards. He swallows hard, feeling the warmth of the spirits burning through his veins, and, with it, a surge of courage. His heart pounds in his chest, but he forces himself to keep a smile on his face, a smile that's equal parts determination and nervousness. "A dance, you say?" His voice is louder now, edged with a playful challenge. He meets Silra's gaze, and for a moment, all the awkwardness falls away, leaving only raw, reckless energy. He reaches out his hand, fingers steady, every fibre of him willing her to take it. The tavern seems to hold its breath. A few heads turn as Jay, the street sweeper, stands with his hand outstretched toward the golden-haired elf. The usual clamour of the rusty anchor fades, curiosity rippling through nearby patrons. Jay doesn't notice. His focus is fixed on Silra on the way her eyes widen, surprise cracking through her composure. For a moment, she just stares at him, her brow furrowing as if she's trying to make sense of his boldness. Her lips part, a breath caught in her throat as she glances from his hand to his face, reading the challenge and the sincerity in his expression. Then, slowly, the corners of her mouth curve into a smile, a real one this time, warm, genuine, with a glint of mischief behind it. She studies him a moment longer, gaze steady, as if weighing the consequences of saying yes. Then, with a graceful motion, she slides her chair back and rises. The folds of her cloak settle around her like a whisper of shadow. She reaches out and takes his hand, her grip surprisingly firm, her skin cool against his rough palm. "I suppose I could humour you, just this once." With that, she steps closer, allowing Jay to lead her toward the small open space near the hearth. A few patrons have moved aside to make room. The firelight dances across her features, casting flickering shadows that highlight the delicate angles of her face. Jay can feel the weight of every gaze in the room, sailors, dockworkers, and townsfolk alike, watching this unlikely pair with a mix of amusement and surprise. The sound of a lively fiddle fills the warm air of the rusty anchor. Cheerful, bouncing notes weave through the crackle of the fire, lifting spirits all around. The fiddler, a wiry old man with a bushy white beard, plays with joyful energy, his foot tapping out the beat on the wooden floor. It's as if his music is the tavern's very heartbeat. He glances toward Jay and Silra as they step into the firelight. His smile widens at the sight of the unlikely pair preparing to dance. Jay's pulse races, his head buzzing with the thrill of the moment. As he takes Silra's hand and places his other hand gingerly at her waist, he can hardly believe this is happening. The music pulses around them. Despite his nerves, he manages a lopsided smile and takes the first step. His movements are rough around the edges, more instinct than skill, but he does his best to stay in rhythm, focusing on the fiddle's bright, rolling melody. Silra moves with effortless grace, her steps precise and smooth, flowing like water around the rougher angles of Jay's attempts to keep up. Her cloak swirls behind her with each turn, catching the firelight and reflecting flashes of gold and green. Her hand rests in his with a surprising gentleness, guiding him subtly when he falters, her touch light but steady. For a moment, Jay's clumsy steps threaten to trip him. He catches himself focusing on Silra's hand in his, and the music filling the space around them. He glances at her. The firelight plays across her features, and her hair catches the light like gold. Her smile is framed by unexpected delight. The playful glint in her eyes dares him to keep up to enjoy the moment, even if he's clearly out of his depth. Silra spins under his arm, her movements fluid and light, like she's floating through the air rather than merely stepping across the creaking floorboards. As she returns to face him, her laughter bubbles up again, clear and bright, like a chime in the music. Jay can't help but laugh too, the sound rough and unrefined compared to hers, but genuine. It mingles with the fiddle's tune, the rhythmic thumping of boots, and the murmur of voices around them. As the fiddle music swirls around them, Jay finds himself feeling bolder, moving with more energy, despite the occasional clumsiness in his steps. He tries to match the rhythm, his focus entirely on Silra's radiant smile and the flicker of the firelight in her eyes. But in his enthusiasm, he misjudges a step, and his foot comes down squarely on hers. Silra's smile vanishes in a sharp intake of breath, and before either of them can recover, they both lose their balance. She stumbles back, and Jay, caught off guard, lurches forward, his hands reaching out to catch her, but finding no purchase. The next moment happens in a rush. Silra's back hits the floor with a dull thud. Jay follows, his weight collapsing down on top of her, his arms flailing uselessly for balance. They land in a heap, tangled together on the tavern's worn floorboards. Jay's breath hitches as he finds himself face to face with Silra, his chest pressed against hers, their faces just inches apart. He can feel the rise and fall of her breath, quick from the sudden fall, and the warmth of her body radiating through her cloak. Her golden hair fans out around her head like a sunburst against the dark wood, and her brown eyes widen in surprise, a mixture of pain and shock flashing across her face. For a moment, everything goes still. The music falters and the fiddler misses a beat, glancing over at the scene unfolding by the fire. Conversations trail off into hushed murmurs. A few patrons burst into hearty laughter at the sight of the street sweeper sprawled on top of the elf. Heat floods Jay's face. His cheeks burn with embarrassment, but the weight of his own awkwardness holds him in place as firmly as the fall. Silra is the first to recover, letting out a soft, pained laugh that shakes her shoulders. Her eyes meet his, and there's a spark of something unguarded, bemusement mingled with genuine amusement. "Well, Jay," she's breathless, a wry smile tugging at the corners of her mouth despite the wince of pain in her foot. "If this was your idea of a dance, I must admit it's unique." "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to," he blurts, words tumbling in a rush of mortified apology. His heart hammers in his chest louder than the resumed murmur of the tavern. He can feel a dozen curious eyes on them. Laughter from the onlookers rings in his ears like a bell. Silra, though clearly bruised and still recovering from the fall, lets out another breathless laugh. Her eyes crinkle at the corners as she props herself up on one elbow. The earlier frustration is replaced by a flicker of resigned amusement. "It's all right, Jay," she says, brushing a strand of golden hair from her face. "I suppose it's not a real adventure without a few stumbles, is it?" She gives him a look that holds no malice, only the kind of wearied humour that suggests she's endured worse. She reaches out a hand toward him, offering him a chance to recover some dignity. "Now, are you going to help me up? Or do you plan on making a habit of landing on top of unsuspecting elves?" Jay takes Silra's offered hand, his grip firm despite the tremor of embarrassment still fluttering in his chest. He pulls her up with a quick, apologetic smile. His cheeks remain flushed as he steadies her on her feet. For a moment they stand close enough for him to catch the glimmer of amusement in her eyes. She winces as she tests her weight on the foot he stepped on, but the humour doesn't leave her gaze. Jay's nerves are still jangling from the tumble, but he forces himself to speak, the words spilling out before he can second-guess himself. "Let me buy you another drink, for your foot," he says. His voice is earnest and a little rushed, but there's a note of genuine concern. Silra raises an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. She gives a small shake of her head, though the gesture is softened by the faint warmth behind her gaze. She tests her foot again, gingerly shifting her weight, but she doesn't pull away from him immediately, letting her hand linger in his for a moment longer, before finally releasing it. "You really do like to buy drinks, don't you, Jay?" she teases, a hint of playfulness in her voice. The smile she offers him now is softer, less guarded than before. But, very well, I suppose I'll accept, considering you've made my evening far more interesting than expected. She glances back toward the bar, where Harlan watches, with a bemused expression, clearly entertained by the spectacle they've created. Most of the tavern's patrons have returned to their conversations. Laughter fades into the usual hum of voices and clinking glasses. Still, a few continue to glance their way, curiosity and amusement lingering in their expressions. Jay manages a lopsided grin, feeling his confidence surge back. He gestures toward the bar, leading the way, his eyes flicking to her injured foot as he moves. He's painfully aware of how out of his depth he is, but the spark in Silra's eyes gives him a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he's managed to turn this disastrous dance into something better than he'd expected. As they reach the bar, he catches Harlan's eye again. The barkeep's smirk growing wider. "Another round, then?" Harlan drawls, casting a knowing look between Jay and Silra, clearly relishing the scene. Jay nods, leaning a little closer to the bar as he slips a few more coins across the counter. Silra, leaning on the bar beside him, watches him out of the corner of her eye, a small private smile playing on her lips. Jay takes a deep breath, feeling his confidence return now that they've settled back at the bar, a fresh drink in front of each of them. He glances at Silra, catching the way the firelight flickers across her face, casting shadows that dance along her soft cheeks. As she picks up her glass, her movements are more measured now, the earlier awkwardness between them softened by the shared laugh. He leans slightly against the bar, trying to appear casual, as he asks, "So, what brings you to my local?" Jay listens as Silra hesitates, her fingers still tracing the rim of her glass. He can sense that she's weighing her words carefully, deciding how much to share. Her usual poise wavers slightly, just enough for him to catch a glimpse of the uncertainty beneath her confident exterior. She takes another sip of the spirit, as if gathering her thoughts, then sets the glass down gently on the bar. Her eyes shift away from his for a moment, as though she's looking past him, into some memory she's not yet ready to fully reveal. When she speaks, her voice is softer, more guarded than before, and there's a note of sadness that wasn't there earlier. "I'm in town looking for something," she says slowly, her words measured. Her gaze flickers back to Jay's face, studying his reaction, though she keeps her own expression carefully neutral. "Something that belonged to me, and it was taken, and I need to find it." Jay tilts his head slightly, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face as he considers her words. He tries for a lighter tone, but there's a genuine concern in his voice when he speaks. "That sounds a bit ominous," he says, offering her a tentative smile. "Maybe I could help, if you'd let me, that is." The Silra raises an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by his offer. She studies Jay for a moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Her fingers tap lightly against her glass, and for the first time there's a flicker of vulnerability behind her sharp gaze. "Ominous? Yes, you could say that." She leans in slightly, her voice lowering to a more serious tone, cutting through the tavern noise. "And for helping me, that depends. I don't need someone who simply thinks they're ready for danger. I need someone who can actually handle it, because what I'm dealing with isn't for the faint of heart." She takes a breath, her expression hardening once again. "I'm tracking something, a shadow that slips through night, leaving nothing but whispers and fear behind. I don't know its full purpose yet, but it has taken something from me. It's tied to something much larger, something—" She tails off. She gives Jay a long look, her tone soft but weighted. "If you're serious about helping, there's no going back. You'll be stepping into something far darker than a spilled drink in a tavern. So, tell me, are you truly prepared for that?" Jay chuckles, a hint of self-deprecation in his tone as he shrugs. "Well, I'm not exactly equipped for grand adventures," he says, grinning. "My skills revolve around sweeping streets and, apparently, falling on top of strangers." He pauses, the grin softening into something more sincere. "But if there's any way I can help tonight, I'm in." He throws her a playful wink, hoping to ease the tension with a touch of humour. Silra stares at Jay for a moment, clearly taken back by his honesty. Then, to his surprise, she bursts into genuine laughter, rich, melodic, and utterly unguarded. She shakes her head, the tension in her shoulders easing as she wipes a tear from the corner of her eye. "Well, at least you're honest. Most would boast of skills they don't have just to save face." She leans forward with a gleam of mischief in her eyes. "And you know what? Sometimes honesty is rarer and far more valuable than all the swords and spells in the world." She takes a deep sip of her drink, then looks at Jay again, her expression more relaxed, though still sharp with curiosity. "I suppose even street sweepers and professional stumblers can be useful if they know how to keep their wits about them." She leans back, finishing her drink, and with a nod she says, "All right then, you're in. Let's see if this night has more surprises for both of us." Jay leans back slightly, a hint of a playful smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I've always been a fan of surprises," he says, his voice light with curiosity. Her brown eyes meet Jay's, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them, though her smile remains. She finishes the last of her drink, her gaze steady. Jay tosses back the rest of his drink in one swift motion, the liquid burning pleasantly as it goes down. He sets the empty glass back on the table with a decisive thud, the alcohol fueling a surge of new-found confidence. With a grin spreading across his face, he leans in slightly and says, "All right, surprise number one. Where are we heading?" Silra arches an eyebrow, clearly entertained by Jay's sudden surge of enthusiasm. Her lips curve into a teasing grin. "Well, aren't you eager?" she remarks, amusement lacing her voice. With a graceful movement, she rises from her seat, adjusting the strap of the worn leather satchel resting on her shoulder. Her eyes glint with a mix of curiosity and challenge as she gestures toward the tavern door. "We're headed to the forest just beyond the town," she says, her tone taking on a more serious note. "There's an old ruin hidden there, ancient, forgotten, and probably crawling with things that should have stayed that way." She leans in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a secret meant only for his ears. "That's where I tracked the shadow to. If it's what I think it is, we'll find more than just ruins, but I need someone to watch my back, and apparently to help me up when I stumble." A soft chuckle escapes her lips, and she tips her head toward the door, inviting him into whatever mystery lies ahead. "So, Jay, ready for your first surprise. Let's hope you're not afraid of shadows." Jay smirks, a hint of playful skepticism in his voice as he asks, "Aren't shadows cast in the daylight?" "Shadows in the day," she echoes, glancing back over her shoulder with a glint of mischief in her eyes. If only it were that simple. The shadows I'm talking about don't care for sunlight or moonlight. They slip in whenever they please, as long as there is darkness. Trust me, you don't want to run into one, no matter the hour. She turns back toward the door, pushing it open as the cool night air flows in. "But don't worry, Jay. Stick close to me, and we might just make it through without becoming shadows ourselves." With a playful smirk, she steps into the night. "Let's go find out, shall we?" Without a coat or any real preparation, Jay bolts after her, barely slowing as he leaves the tavern's warmth behind. The cold night air bites at his skin, but eagerness drives him on. He catches up to Silra, and when she glances back, surprise flickers in her eyes, quickly replaced by a smirk. "No coat, no weapon, just pure enthusiasm. I admire your spirit, Jay, but let's hope you don't come to regret it," she says, her voice carrying a mix of amusement and warning. Jay shrugs and says, "I'll be all right." Silra sees right through his bravado. "We'll see about that," she says, a playful challenge in her voice as she heads for the town gates. Thank you for listening. I'm creating and sharing this story on my own, so your support genuinely means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it and leave a review wherever you listen. Those small things really help support me. For updates, or if you'd like to read the story instead, visit silverwoodsaga.com. Thank you.